start with Michelle, who has written a story which in part includes a major element of memory.
Well, it's great to be here, and thank you for leading us on this discussion. That was such a wonderful story about your patient. And I guess maybe I'll just talk very briefly, and instead of talking about fiction, my own personal response to the story, I'll just tell you a little story about my 5.5-year-old son. I was reading a story called The Peddler Lady, I think is the name of the story, to him recently, and there's a part in this old poverty-stricken woman journeys across this ravaged landscape after dreaming of a place that she should go. And she finally, after this long journey, walking with her cane, arrives in this place and at sort of this palace, and the guard laughs at her, and he says, "What are you doing here?" And she said, I dreamed that I should come here. And he said, "Well, you're a fool to follow dreams." And he says, "Last night I dreamt that under a drought-stricken tree on which bottles hung, I found a great treasure." And at this point in the story, there's a line about something turning over in the woman's mind. And my 5.5-year-old son, we get to this point in the story, and his eyes just lit up. And he said, "Oh, the tree with the bottles," because early in the story, the woman is trying to plant things beneath this drought-stricken tree with bottles hanging on it. And it's very interesting. Any of you has ever read a story to children, and I imagine most of you have, to watch, you can watch how fiction, how you can watch them entering the story, and you can watch the moment that they make a discovery in the story, and what a wonderful surprise and moment that is for them. So I just think about, when I think about fiction in the brain, I think about the ways that we develop as in our young years through listening to stories and also through playing out stories in our imaginary lives.
Thank you. I love being here. Passage as an entity started in this building. So it's very emotional for me to be here. We had an office on the 8th floor, I think it was, and we weren't supposed to have any customers. It was supposed to be mail order. But people came and the books fell on their heads, so some of them probably have neurological problems. Michelle was talking about children, and one of the great books out right now is a book called Room by Emma Donahue. This is the book. I was so resistant to reading this book. I was not going to read this book. I hate books where children have problems, big problems. This is told in the voice of a 5-year-old boy who was born in this room. And it turns out that his mother was kidnapped by a sexual pervert, and he was the result, and they have been locked in this room all of his life. And she is determined that his brain will develop and that he will develop in a normal way. And so she does all kinds of things. And you know, she's only a teenager when she's kidnapped, but she figures it out. And Emma Donahue gets the voice of this child so beautifully that it became a problem for me because, and this is when I really love a book, it's when it becomes a problem, that I would be supposedly working on the budget, let's say. And all of a sudden the voice of Jack would come and he would talk about how he was learning to count to 20. And I was much more interested in Jack than my normal everyday. I think our brains work differently, and Bob could certainly tell me more about that, when we actually read a book on the page and we become so involved in that way. But this book, if you ever read it, and you must, I have to insist, it's shortlisted for the Booker Prize. They're announcing it this week, so who knows. But you will find that your mind will not let go. And to me, that's great storytelling.
I'm very happy to be here. I mostly came to see the redwoods. To me, I think the abilities to write and read so far surpass any practical neurologic purpose. I think it's our equivalent of peacock tails or huge antlers or something like that. I would not know who I was unless I was part Huck Finn, part Tom Sawyer, part Holden Caulfield. And I think there is something that happens reading-wise. You have the shock of recognition, and you have the feeling of not being alone. And the feeling of being alone, I think, inhibits growth of all sorts. It certainly inhibits recovery, whether it's depression or psychotic break or anything. Somebody who is in relationship to other people and able to read and able to appreciate reading and able to try to create is, miles ahead of somebody who was locked into his own head. So for me, writing is really is magic, and it's been life-saving. And well, anyway, I'm just glad to be here tonight.
So my role on this panel and also in my professional life is that I'm the guy in the circus who comes along after all the big animals have left the tent, and I clean up with a little broom. So this is my professional role, is to try to understand after the fact what fiction writers do and how they do it. I'm fascinated by the fact that we're all now living in a time that I think is unprecedented in human history, in the sense that we have more access to fictions of all kinds all the time than we have ever had before. What does this do to our minds? What does this do to our brains? I think it's a fascinating question. I'm going to give you a negative example, although there are many, many sort of positive examples we could work with. But a Yale psychologist, a man named Paul Bloom, recently claimed that Americans spend on average 4 minutes a day having sex and well over 4 hours a day absorbed in fictions of various kinds. So you have to wonder what the sort of adaptive purpose is of these kinds of fictions. So here's my sort of negative example. There was a young Korean couple, maybe you read about them, who spent so much time taking care of their virtual infant in a simulation game that their own little baby died of neglect. So you have to wonder from a sort of Darwinian perspective how this could possibly contribute to their inclusive fitness, or how this obsession with fiction that they had could possibly have been adaptive from their point of view. I suspect that our sort of media saturation, our saturation with fiction, is a little bit like what the naturalist Nico Tinbergen called a supernormal stimulus. So in other words, it's a sort of exaggerated version of a stimulus that produces, in some cases, a kind of maladaptive response. He first noticed this when his pet fish, a stickleback, went into full-on fight mode whenever the red mail truck would come zooming through the neighborhood. So the idea is that red was the color that male sticklebacks used to signal aggression. So his fish would just go in full-on fight mode. I wonder if, to some extent, our super saturated fictional storytelling environment doesn't have the capacity to have that kind of effect on us sometimes, which is not to say that it doesn't always, or that it always